Hi, John Seifer here. Today's topic is the CEO's Guide to Output Thinking. But the first question you should be asking is, why should I listen to this guy? Here's a snapshot of my background. I've been an entrepreneur all my working life, and in the 1990s I moved 1,500 miles away from my most lucrative company and ran it long distance, when that wasn't as easy as it is now. I owned that company for 25 years. I was able to systemize it and pull myself away from the day-to-day work, which allowed me time to work with a team to start the International Coach Federation and be their fourth president in 1998. I've been coaching other business owners since then in the U.S. and in Europe, and I literally wrote the book on output thinking. Your job as CEO is to run your company so that it throws off cash, and also to allocate that cash productively. Output thinking helps you do both. Like I said on the cover of my book, output thinking helps you scale faster, manage better, and transform your company. What's not on the cover of the book, and I'm going to share with you today, is how output thinking helps you get away from the day-to-day routine so you can focus on more important things and less urgent things. Here's the gist of the book in 3 sentences. I'll share them and then we'll dig deeper. Sentence number 1 is, you hire people not to fill a role or inhabit a job title, but to produce outputs. Sentence number 2, the key to profitable growth is to have people produce those outputs through well-defined systems. And 3, all systems in all companies produce outputs that fill the same 7 buckets. Let's dig a little deeper into each one. The first sentence, you hire people not to fulfill a role or inhabit a job title, but to produce outputs. There's a children's fairy tale of the shoemaker and the elves. And the shoemaker was down to his last piece of leather, and so he cut out the pieces to make the shoes, and he put them on his table, and he went to bed intending to make the shoes together in the morning. Well, while he was asleep, the elves came in and put the shoes together, and they put marvelous shoes together so that he was able to make a lot more money. But before he woke up, the elves disappeared. And he woke up in the morning and said, "Hey, the elves have been here." How did he know? Well, he saw something that was different. What used to be pieces of leather laid out on his table was now fully made shoes. That's output, something you see. If your people came in the middle of the night while you were asleep, did great work, and went home before you got there, what would you see? How would you know that they did good work? That's output. What's important is not the work that people are doing, but the output that the work produces. It's a subtle but powerful difference, both for you and for them. Here's some types of output. Making a thing is an output, obviously. A pair of shoes, a hamburger, making a sale. A change in status is an output. A janitor doesn't make the room, but they make the room clean. Or an inspector doesn't make the part, but they change the status of the part to either reject it or accept it. Behaviors can be outputs. Decisions are outputs. Solutions to certain kinds of problems are outputs. And relationships are outputs. It's important when you're buying a company or selling a company that the relationships the owner has stay with the company and not with the person. Outputs have various properties. Most outputs have numbers associated with them. They often have quality associated with them. There's a capacity of how many outputs a particular person is expected to make in a given period of time. And some outputs require training or certification in order to be produced properly. And outputs have a frequency, how often they should be done. There's usually a cost associated with it. There may be other properties associated with your outputs depending on what those outputs are. But without well-defined outputs, you don't really know if someone is doing a good job, and neither do they. That makes managing hard on you and hard on the employees who want to do a good job, but may not know what a good job looks like. You may think that job titles suffice for defining people's outputs, but job titles are deceptive for 2 reasons. One is they're not consistent. Let's take the title of marketing director. In one company, the outputs expected from the person with that title are a certain number of social media posts every week and a certain amount of SEO and that kind of thing. In another company, the exact same title, marketing director, the outputs expected of them are a budget, hiring a team, and the team will produce those social media posts and SEO. But that's not the job of that marketing director. So you have the same title, different outputs. Another example is that people often produce multiple outputs in their job, and some of them are not even related to their job title. You may have a mechanic, for example, who's a really good proofreader, And so when you put out a brochure or a social media post, it gets proofread by them. But proofreading is a vital output for the company. It's just not a part of their mechanic's job description. Or let me ask you this, who fixes your printer when it's offline? Is that output as important as it is? Is that part of that person's job description? In many cases, it's not. Good people actually produce what I call shadow outputs. That means they just get in there and figure out what outputs need to be done without being told, and they just do them. You'd think that's a good thing, and it is, at first. The problem with shadow outputs is that you don't know that they're being produced. That makes it hard to promote that person without things falling through the cracks. And that may mean that it's hard to expand that position because there's outputs being produced that you're not aware of or that nobody's being trained for. There's a story I tell in the book of a person who was hired to be a programmer. And she realized that there were some deficiencies in the situation. The roadmap hadn't been updated, so she updated it. There were some design questions that hadn't been asked, so she asked them and got them answered. There were junior engineers who hadn't been onboarded properly, so she helped them get up to speed. And then when her review came, she was passed over for a promotion because they said she didn't do enough coding, which was what she was hired to do, when in fact, she actually noted some deficiencies that typically are management outputs, and she filled in them without being asked to, and it wasn't good for her and ultimately wasn't good for the company. With well-defined outputs, hiring is easier because you can put outputs right in the job description. Instead of saying, we'd like to hire a salesperson, you'll have territory X and you'll report to the CRO, for example. You can say, we're hiring a salesperson, here's your territory. We expect you to produce 5 new accounts every quarter and increase the sales in your existing accounts by 5%. Those are measurable outputs, and that makes their performance review a lot easier. You can also manage by holding people accountable when you have described the outputs, because they have agreed that they will produce those outputs when they took on the job. And well-defined outputs provide a clear path to promotion. You can say to somebody, this is the job you're doing now. These are the outputs you're doing a great job at. But if you want to get promoted, these are the other different outputs that you'll need to be producing. And we want to make sure that you're trained and that you're good at those before we can promote you. So let's move on to sentence 2, which says the key to profitable growth is to have people produce outputs through well-defined systems. Now we have to ask, where do outputs come from? Well, when a mommy and daddy output love each other, no, wait a minute, that's the wrong story. Outputs come from either good people who have experience and expertise or average people operating systems. I call the first one grandma in the kitchen with no recipe. Thanksgiving dinner is wonderful. Birthdays are terrific. It's great food, but it's hard to scale. As companies scale, the outputs produced by systems multiply faster than grandmothers. We can see why in this quote from Daniel Jones, who is the chairman of the Lean Enterprise Academy. Lean Enterprise Manufacturing started as the Toyota Way, and that helped Toyota move from being a second-rate car manufacturer to, at one point, the largest car manufacturer in the world. The quote, with my emphasis, is, brilliant process management is our strategy. We get brilliant results from average people managing brilliant processes. We observe that our competitors often get average or worse results from brilliant people managing broken processes. It's easier to scale your company with average people than with grandmothers. Why? Because systems can multiply. You can have multiple people operating the same system in the same way, producing more of the same output. But systems also subdivide. That means that they break out into subsystems, where the output of one becomes the input to the next. Someone may design a brochure from beginning to end, but as you subdivide that work, someone may write the copy, someone else may edit it, someone else may do the graphics, someone else puts it all together into different sizes and file formats. As you do that, you have these subsystems where the outputs can be done, some of them can be done by people with less training and with less cost. The goal is to drive things downwards in your organization through systemization so they don't depend on people at the top. Besides lower cost and greater scalability, better systemizations leads to epitog, Well, I don't really call it that. What it really means is everyone plays at the top of their game. What that means is everybody is doing stuff that they are really good at, and not so much of the stuff that they're not good at. I had a client who was telling me about someone in his office who was really terrific. His whole office, it was remote. Some people were in the States and some people were offshore. And this person was actually in the States. And he said, the reason she's so good is that she's doing stuff that she's absolutely wonderful at. Turns out it's very repetitive work. It's very simple work. Doesn't require a lot of judgment, but it's perfect for her. She's always on time and she always does good work. What about you? How often do you play at the top of your game? Another way to say this is, what's your superpower? As systems subdivide, people will be able to do more of the things that are just their superpower and less of the other stuff. But also as they subdivide, you'll end up with dozens and probably hundreds, maybe even thousands of all these different subsystems in your company. So it's going to be hard to wrap your head around what's all going on in the entire organization. Often, the way people organize that is through an org chart. But we've already talked about the deficiencies of looking at your organization through job titles and through roles. And here's another way to organize your thinking. This goes on to sentence number 3, which is that the systems in all companies produce outputs that fill the same 7 buckets. These are the 7 buckets. You have to sell. That's the green one. You have to find customers. Everything you do, from marketing to doing proposals, setting prices, that's all about selling and filling that selling bucket. And then, once you get those customers, you have to serve them, which means you have to make something, a product or a service that people want to pay for. And as CEO, your job is to balance the outputs in those 2 buckets, because you don't want to make stuff that you can't sell, and you don't want to sell stuff that you can't make. The blue buckets are what I call the supporting or the sustaining buckets, because they exist to keep the selling and the serving going. You need people, you need money, you need information, etc. And the yellow are the outputs that go into scaling your company. Those are things like setting strategy, goals, plans, metrics. These are typically the outputs associated with the role of CEO, and we can get into the full-blown CEO outputs at another time. But with this view of outputs, systems, and buckets, it allows you to scale faster, manage better, and transform your company. That's all in the book. What about the daily demands on your time? How do you get off this wheel? Remember what we said about the properties of outputs? One of the properties of each output is frequency. The frequency of an output is not optional. It's demanded by your customers, either directly or indirectly by your company's ability to serve those customers. Some outputs need to be produced daily, some weekly, some monthly or quarterly, some maybe even hourly for some companies. So make a chart of all the outputs that you're responsible for and note their frequency. If you are responsible to produce outputs that need to be done daily, guess what? You have to be at work every day. If you can figure out how to train somebody else to produce those daily outputs or those weekly outputs and delegate that work to them, then your chart will look more like this. And if you delegate the more frequent outputs to others, you can step away from the daily demands on your time and work on things that are less urgent or more important. I hope I've shown you how output thinking will help you scale faster, manage better, transform your company, and give you time to use your superpower. But wait, there's more. We don't really have time to get into this today, but I wanted to share with you 2 more things that I work on with clients that might be useful for you to consider. One is that the systems need to be designed, they need to be documented with standard operating procedure, and work needs to be directed through that systems. So for example, let's think about designing an assembly line in a manufacturing plant. Well, somebody has to design it, figure out where all the stations are and what goes where. And then somebody has to document what happens at each station so that the people can do their job properly. Somebody else, usually, is managing the work through those assembly line stations. There might be 50 or 60 parts at different points in all that. Designing, documenting, directing this work, those are all different skills. It's fine if you're not good at all of them. They may not be your superpower, but your company needs somebody to be good at them. So find people who are good at them so everyone plays at the top of their game. The second thing I want to tell you about is the 8th bucket. This is what the company produces for its owners. I ask clients if their business were a genie, what would they ask it for? You could get as many wishes as you want from this genie. And everyone says three things: more money, more time away from work, and work that they love. Those are the three universals, but I've also uncovered about 20 other things that are not universal. Some people want their business to leave a legacy. Some people want it to serve a mission. Some people want it to launch themselves into other areas of their life. That's what I did when I got away from the day-to-day of my business and started the International Coach Federation. Whatever it is for you, when you know what you want from your company, you can build it in a way that gives you what you want. But that 8th bucket will only get filled by filling the 7 buckets inside your company. If you like this and are a real glutton for punishment, here are some other ways I can help you run your company better. Buy the book. It's on Amazon or at outputthinking.com. I also offer a free coaching session, but I don't do my coaching in this kind of coach. I do it over Zoom. It's just that all the online pictures of coaching sessions look so goofy, but it really is a coaching session and not a sales pitch. I have free subscriptions here on YouTube or my newsletter at Substack. And you can hire me. I do speaking engagements, I facilitate leaders meetings, I run team projects, and if I have a slot open in my schedule, I can be your coach. Shoot me an email to let me know what you need. And thanks for your attention.